Recently, Chris Bernique asked a question related to one of the videos I did. I don't remember which one, but it was essentially, how do you know when to thin acrylic paints? When do you make the decision to thin with water or to thin with Lamy and medium, or, something like that? This is Vallejo Sky Gray, by the way. And I gave him an answer that I think was, fairly complete, but I thought, hey, this is actually worth exploring. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put some of this, the Sky Gray, in my palette, and then I'm going to put roughly equal mix of various thinners, various mediums, water being the one here in the middle, and then I'm going to put some Lamy and medium over here, and I'm going to eyeball that one. It's rarely a precise thing, but we'll call that 50-50. I'll mix that up and wipe that off on my t-shirt, which my wife loves. I'll mix this up and get that good and stirred up. And then I'm also going to just leave that for, where is it? Liquitex Matte Medium. You see, that's thick. And I do that to illustrate a point that I'm going to make later, assuming I remember the point that I want to make later. So anyway, I've got those mixed up. Now, you can already see that it has some effect on the color. What's happening, like especially in this one, you'll see it as time goes on. The one that was thinned with water, it's beginning to separate. You see how there's kind of a reddish almost look to this, whereas this is staying together fairly well, as is this. And if I paint these on to something, just do a little quick dab into it, paint it on, you can kind of see, and this is just rough painting obviously, but you can kind of see the difference. Now, this one that's been thinned with water, if you stir that back up, it's going to be viable. But do you see the kind of, if you start really dabbing at it, do you see the patchiness that comes in? The pigments don't hold together. It's separating the binder is separating the pigments. I don't remember all the technical part of it. This goes on kind of thick because that matte medium is quite thick, and you see it's leaving some texture. But I'll just set those there so they can dry. For quick thinning, water works fine, but you have to keep stirring the paint. Now, when you stir it, you mix everything back together, and it stays viable. It's going to go on fine. Now, if I keep adding more water to this, let me just go whole hog and just add quite a bit of water to it, you're going to get a lot more separation. We'll just watch that one for a while. You see there's some separation here, but I can stir that around and it goes away. So what you're thinning the paint with is going to affect how it separates, how it goes on the model, how it appears on the model, the opacity and all of that. The experience is going to tell you which one works better for you. I can tell you always use this or always use that, but there's times that I use water because it's quick and it's cheap. Generally, a rule of thumb is if I'm going to be thinning it just a little, maybe putting in just a little to make some paint flow better, maybe 2 parts paint, 1 part water. That's kind of the ratio I look for. Sometimes I do it 1-to-1. I do it quite often, but it's because I know I'm going to be building up layers. If I want to thin it beyond that, or if I want to really do some glazing type things, if I want to do something where I'm building up layers over layers and building up the transparency, I'm going to use some other kind of medium. Now, I showed this briefly just a minute ago. This matte medium from, I use Liquitex, there's other brands. This is great to have because you can mix this, a little of this, because it's quite thick. You can mix a little of this with some water and it gives you a matte varnish. And it's going to save you money over buying varnishes in this size. I suspect that Lamy medium is really just some of that matte medium with some water in it. There's other things that I use. I use glaze medium because what the glaze medium will do is it not only thins it like a medium would do, like the matte medium or something like that, but I think it has a little bit of retarder in it because it slows down the drying time. So if you want to work with the paint and not have it dry so fast, a little bit of glaze medium will help. You can also buy glaze medium from the art store in very large bottles. So having some of that, because I don't use this that often, I just stick with the little bottles. So these are all things that I find helpful to have around. And like the satin varnish, I usually use that as an overcoat or a matte varnish. If I want to matte something down, you can mix it with the paint, but experiment with the paint because it's going to differ from paint to paint in how it's going to react. Look at how this color has separated out. This is why I always say sky gray is a nice warm tone, because if you watch it separate, you can see the color that is in the background there coming out. Now, another thing to keep in mind is the brand of paint can affect how it separates in the palette, if it separates, things like that. Now, certainly any acrylic paint, you put enough water in, it's going to start separating. But different paints behave different ways. Vallejo is probably my favorite paint to use all around, but it tends to, especially with certain colors, it tends to separate fairly quickly with just plain water. Like I think it's olive drab, USA olive drab or something like that. There's one that's a dark green color that, man, you put some water in it, and before long, it's just you've got this green mass and this yellow mass, and you may even be able to see little bits of blue, but they separate fairly quickly. The AK third generation, they seem to do the same way. In fact, these two paints, they're not made by the same people as far as I know. That's not coming out of the same factory and just given a different label. But the way they behave in my use, they're virtually the same. And I say that not to say pick one over the other, but find the color that you want, what's available near you. If this is available near you, get this. If this is, get this. If you find a better color in one range than another range, go for the color. Don't worry about the brand. I've gotten to where I'm not too picky about the brand. Life Color, I've only got a few of these, but I've been real impressed with these because they tend to hold up better when thinned with water. They hold their structure much better. Again, there's a point where they can separate, and you can use that. You can use that patchiness, that way that paint looks when it begins separating. You can use that as a weathering effect or that kind of thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of, and then learning how to make use of it. And then Citadel paints, they also hold up good to thinning. Not quite as good as Life Color, but a little better than Vallejo in my usage. But I use all of them. These because they're just cost effective and they're good, solid paints. I actually think Citadel is probably the best in terms of grip on the model. And I say that not just from use of them on models, but when I put them on this palette here, these peel up like skin. I mean, it takes a little work, but they peel up like skin. These, I had to scrape these off. They do not want to let go. So I've been impressed with their hold on things. Now you can see here how that's looking. And, depending on what you're going for, all of those could be acceptable results. The one that I thinned with the matte medium is still a little moist looking, so that extends the drying time. These I can touch no problem and they're dry. This has a little bit of texture. This has virtually none. So, you know, if I go in here with this, even as thin as this is, and stir this up, I can build up layers of this and take advantage of that opacity. So don't discount if you don't have any medium and all you have is water. Don't discount using a lot of water. You can make it work. You just got to play with it a little bit. But as with anything in this hobby, experience is really going to pay off. This is why I talk about in various ways painting things for the experience of it, not necessarily because it's going to be seen or because it's an important detail. But if you're painting the interior of something that's going to be buttoned up, that's where you experiment. If you get spare parts, parts that are just laying around, like I did a rust video, and I just used these and I showed different things on them. I can prime over that and paint it again and test things. I keep bits of plastic like this nearby. I've got the little Hellcat that I'm constantly using, the 72nd scale Hellcat that I'm constantly using to experiment. So there's good reason for any of these things to be used in combination, but I don't know that there's any one magic formula that I would say applies in every case. If you're not sure, get some matte medium and thin it with a little bit of water, about a 50-50 mix. And if you use that all the time, you're going to have good results generally. Again, you can push, when you're talking acrylics, you can push anything to the edge. So thanks, Chris, for asking that question. It actually got me thinking a lot, as the last 12, 15 minutes have proved that I ramble on. But there's a lot to think about when you're thinking about thinning your paints and what the purpose is for and how it's going to affect the paint and how it goes on the model.